It was a crisp Monday morning in Washington, D.C., and the air inside the White House press room crackled with tension. The media had been circling like hawks, eager for any sign of weakness in President Donald Trump's administration. At the heart of this storm stood Karoline Leavitt, the youngest and perhaps most fearless White House press secretary in modern history. At just 30, she'd earned both admiration and criticism for her unapologetic defense of the president's policies and her razor-sharp tongue in press briefings. But today wasn't going to be just another sparring match with the usual reporters. Today, the MSNBC Special Morning Edition was hosting a live panel that included none other than Jen Psaki, former White House press secretary under President Joe Biden. Psaki had built a reputation for her quick wit, polished demeanor, and subtle condescension toward the Trump administration. The network had hyped this broadcast for days, billing it as the showdown. Experience meets firebrand. As the cameras went live, Karoline appeared calm, dressed in a sharp navy suit, her blonde hair tucked behind one ear, her eyes focused like a laser on the camera lens. Across the split screen, Psaki smirked slightly, as if she knew something Karoline didn't. The host barely finished his introduction before Psaki pounced. "I'm just curious," Psaki began, voice dripping with practiced poise, "how it feels to be the mouthpiece for an administration that routinely undermines democracy, spreads misinformation, and isolates America on the world stage." The question wasn't really a question. It was a carefully constructed jab, a trap designed to fluster the younger press secretary on live TV. The panel chuckled lightly, and even the host looked mildly uncomfortable at Psaki's boldness. But Karoline didn't blink. "Well, Jen," Karoline replied coolly, "I suppose it feels a lot like being a press secretary who had to explain away rising inflation, botched foreign policy, and a commander-in-chief who forgot what office he held on multiple occasions. But I'm here to talk policy, not personal attacks." Psaki's smile faded just a bit, but she wasn't done. Over the next few minutes, she hammered Karoline with thinly veiled insults, calling the administration's positions amateur hour, accusing Karoline of gaslighting the American people and suggesting she lacked the gravitas needed for such a serious role. Karoline took it in stride. She had faced tough crowds before, but she knew Psaki's words weren't just for the panel, they were for the millions watching at home, voters, journalists, and political operatives who would dissect every word on social media within seconds. Then Psaki went too far. "You're the perfect fit for this White House, Karoline," Psaki said with a cold laugh. "Style over substance, bravado over facts. But that's what happens when you hire cheerleaders instead of communicators." The studio fell silent. Even the host raised his eyebrows in surprise at Psaki's open insult. The comment wasn't just a dig at Karoline's job performance, it was personal, designed to humiliate her in front of the nation. Karoline felt the heat rise in her chest. She could hear the blood pounding in her ears. But she didn't let it show. She drew a breath, her mind racing through years of preparation, experience, and conviction. The moment had arrived. If she handled it right, she could turn the tables not just on Psaki, but on an entire media narrative that had been stacked against her from day one. What she said next would not only stun Psaki into silence, it would light up the political world like wildfire. Karoline let the silence linger just a moment longer, long enough for viewers at home to lean closer to their screens, for reporters to lift their pens, for producers to signal to the control room that something big was about to happen. Then, with a calmness that betrayed none of the storm swirling inside her, she leaned forward toward the camera. "You know, Jen," Karoline began, voice steady, tone deliberate, "it's easy to sit on the sidelines and throw stones. It's easy to criticize when you're no longer the one making decisions. But here's the truth, and I hope every American hears this, we're not here to please the press. We're here to serve the people. And while you were busy defending failure, I'm busy defending a comeback." The words hit the panel like a shockwave. Psaki's smirk disappeared entirely. The host tried to jump in, but Karoline held the floor. The chat feed on the network's live stream exploded. Thousands of comments pouring in, some cheering, others stunned into digital silence. On social media, hashtags like #LeavittClapback and #PressRoomQueen began trending within minutes. Karoline wasn't done. "You talk about style over substance," she continued, fixing Psaki with a look that was both respectful and unflinching. "Let's talk substance. Our administration has created jobs, real jobs, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. We've secured our borders, rebuilt our military strength, and brought back manufacturing. We're putting America first while you and your team were busy putting America last. Psaki opened her mouth to respond, but Karoline pressed on, her voice rising just enough to show passion without crossing into anger. And let me remind you, the American people didn't vote for a press secretary. They voted for a president who would fight for them. That's what Donald J. Trump is doing every single day. And that's what I'm proud to stand for, no matter how many times you try to insult me personally. The host finally managed to cut in, his voice shaky with excitement. All right, let's let Jen respond. But Psaki was caught off guard. For the first time in a long time, the seasoned communicator seemed at a loss for words. She blinked rapidly, searching for a retort that wouldn't sound petty or defensive. Karoline sat back in her chair, her work done. In that one sentence, we're not here to please the press. We're here to serve the people. And while you were busy defending failure, I'm busy defending a comeback. She had shifted the entire energy of the conversation. No longer was she the young upstart being scolded by the elder stateswoman. Now, she was the voice of conviction, of confidence, of a movement determined to chart its own course regardless of the media's approval. Across the nation, conservative commentators praised her performance. Clips of the exchange dominated news cycles for days. Even some neutral analysts admitted that Karoline had outplayed Psaki in a game the older press secretary thought she had mastered. But behind the scenes, Karoline knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. She had thrown down a gauntlet not just to Psaki but to the entire political establishment that had written her off as a lightweight. And as she left the studio later that day, her phone buzzing with messages of support and outrage in equal measure, Karoline Leavitt understood that she had just stepped onto a larger battlefield, one where every word, every sentence, would shape the future of American politics. But she was ready for the fight. Karoline exited the studio with her head held high, the hum of reporters shouting questions fading behind her as she stepped into the black SUV waiting at the curb. As the door closed, she finally let herself exhale. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the live broadcast now left her hands slightly trembling, but her mind was crystal clear. She had seized the moment. And judging by the flood of messages lighting up her phone, America had noticed. Inside the vehicle, her communications director, a young man named Eric Daniels, was scrolling furiously through social media. His eyes widened with each passing second. Karoline, you're trending. Everywhere. Not just on conservative feeds. CNN, ABC, even the New York Times, they're all covering it. That sentence, we're not here to please the press. We're here to serve the people. It's already being called the line of the year, he said, his voice a mixture of awe and excitement. Karoline gave a small smile. Good. That's exactly where the conversation needs to be. As they made their way back to the White House, the media frenzy grew louder. On Fox News, pundits called her response, "the shot heard round the press room." A popular talk radio host dubbed it, "the moment Karoline Leavitt became a household name." On social media, supporters posted clips of the exchange with captions like, "This is what real leadership looks like," and finally, "Someone stands up to the media elite." But not all the reactions were positive. MSNBC hosts blasted her as disrespectful and arrogant. Progressive commentators accused her of deflecting and gaslighting the American public. Memes appeared comparing Karoline to a schoolyard bully, while others mocked Psaki's stunned expression. Karoline knew the backlash would come. In Washington, a win for one side always felt like an attack to the other. But she didn't have time to dwell on the noise. The White House was already preparing for the afternoon's press briefing, and she knew reporters would be chomping at the bit to press her further. In the briefing room that afternoon, the energy was electric. Reporters filled every seat, and the cameras zoomed in as Karoline took her place at the podium. She could see the hunger in their eyes, the desire to knock her down a peg after that morning's viral triumph. The first question came from a veteran journalist with the Washington Post. "Karoline, critics have accused you of being combative and disrespectful in your response to Jen Psaki this morning. Do you regret your words?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "No, I don't regret standing up for this administration and for the American people. My job isn't to win popularity contests with the press. My job is to communicate the policies and priorities of President Donald J. Trump, who was elected to serve all Americans, not just the media, not just the Beltway elite, but everyday citizens across this great nation." The room buzzed as more hands shot up. Another reporter from a major network followed up. "But don't you think your tone contributes to the polarization in our country?" Karoline leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. What contributes to polarization, she said slowly, making sure every word landed, is a media that refuses to cover the facts and instead focuses on personalities, narratives, and spin. If holding the press accountable for that makes me unpopular in this room, I'm okay with that. Because outside these walls, Americans are tired of the games. They want results. And that's what this administration is delivering. Once again, the clip would play on repeat across networks and social media platforms. Once again, Karoline had turned what could have been a defensive moment into an offensive strike. But as she returned to her office, shutting out the din of the cameras and chatter, Karoline knew the real battle was still ahead. Psaki wasn't the only adversary. The entire media machine was gearing up for war, and Karoline had just painted a target on her back. Yet deep down, she welcomed the challenge. Because in that one sentence, in that one moment, she had discovered the power of her own voice. And there was no turning back. Cable news panels debated her remarks from dawn till dusk. Some praised her as the fresh voice of a new conservative generation, while others painted her as the face of what they called Trump's media-bashing machine. The New York Times ran an op-ed titled, "When the Press Secretary Becomes the Attack Dog," accusing Karoline of abandoning the dignity of the office. The Wall Street Journal countered with Karoline Leavitt, a fighter the GOP desperately needed. Karoline sat in her West Wing office, scrolling through the coverage. The words stung, but they didn't surprise her. She had known what was coming the second she fired back at Psaki. This was the game. The media would either build you up or try to tear you down, sometimes both in the span of 24 hours. Her team had already compiled a stack of interview requests. Fox wanted her on Hannity. Newsmax offered a primetime slot. Even 60 Minutes reached out, hoping to profile her as the lightning rod press secretary of the Trump era. But amid the flood of attention, the real work continued. That afternoon, Karoline joined President Trump in the Oval Office for a policy strategy session. The president, ever attuned to the mood of the country, was in high spirits. "Karoline, that was beautiful," Trump said, grinning as he leaned back in his chair. "You gave it to them straight. The people loved it. Keep doing that. Don't let them rattle you. They hate you because you tell the truth and you're good at it." Karoline nodded, grateful for the support. "Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not backing down." Trump's eyes twinkled. "I didn't think you would." But the opposition wasn't staying quiet either. Jen Psaki, stung by the viral moment, made her rounds on sympathetic networks. On MSNBC, she tried to regain control of the narrative. "I think what we saw was a young woman in over her head," Psaki said during an interview. "This is serious business. It's not about zingers or going viral. It's about communicating clearly with the American people. And I worry that what we're seeing is more performance than substance." The words were designed to undermine Karoline's growing stature. But if Psaki thought Karoline would shy away from the spotlight, she was mistaken. That evening, Karoline accepted the invitation to appear on Hannity. The interview was electric. With the host's encouragement, Karoline outlined the administration's achievements, economic growth, border security, foreign policy victories, while taking measured, powerful shots at the media's bias. "Sean, I respect good journalism," she said. "But too often what we see in these press rooms isn't about truth. It's about power. It's about controlling the narrative. And that's why they hate this administration, because we refuse to play their game." Her words resonated far beyond Fox News' core audience. Clips of the appearance spread across social platforms, reaching independents and even some Democrats disillusioned with the media's double standards. But with every appearance, every headline, Karoline's profile and the stakes grew higher. The press corps grew more aggressive. At briefings, questions turned sharper, laced with sarcasm and scorn. Anonymous sources leaked stories accusing her of being divisive inside the White House, though few could point to any actual tensions. Karoline knew what was happening. The establishment was pushing back. And the more they pushed, the stronger she resolved to stand firm. Because this wasn't just about Karoline Leavitt anymore. This was about something bigger, a battle over who controlled the story of America. And Karoline intended to win. The sun rose over the Washington Monument, casting long shadows across the National Mall as Karoline Leavitt prepared for what would be the most watched press briefing of her career. Overnight, the buzz surrounding her confrontation with Jen Psaki had only grown louder. Cable news anchors debated her every word. Editorials filled columns in major newspapers. Political influencers, from small-town radio hosts to national figures, weighed in on what Karoline represented for the future of political communication in America. Inside the White House, the mood was focused but tense. Staffers passed Karoline in the hallway, some offering quiet nods of encouragement. Others simply stayed out of her way, knowing that today's briefing wasn't just about answering questions, it was about defining the terms of engagement between the Trump administration and the media going forward. As Karoline stepped up to the familiar podium, the camera's red lights blinked to life. The briefing room was packed, not just with reporters, but with extra camera crews and observers who had been granted special access. The world was watching. She scanned the room briefly, took a breath, and began. Good afternoon. Before I take your questions today, I want to address something head-on. Over the last few days, there's been a lot of commentary, much of it from people who've never spent a day in this job, about the role of the White House press secretary. Some have said my job is to please the media. Some have suggested my job is to avoid controversy. Let me be clear, my job is to speak for the President of the United States. My job is to speak for the people who elected him. And I will never apologize for doing that with conviction. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on her. Reporters had expected deflection, maybe even contrition. What they got instead was clarity and strength. Karoline continued, outlining the administration's latest accomplishments. A new trade agreement that promised to bring manufacturing jobs back to the Midwest, a sweeping plan to improve veterans' health care, new measures to secure the southern border without compromising legal immigration. Then came the questions. The first reporter tried to revive the Psaki feud. Karoline, do you think it's appropriate to use the press room to attack former officials as you did with Jen Psaki? Karoline's gaze didn't waver. I didn't attack anyone. I defended this administration's record, and I stood up for the millions of Americans who are tired of being talked down to by a political class that thinks it knows better than they do. If that makes some uncomfortable, so be it. I'm not here to make anyone comfortable, I'm here to tell the truth. The next reporter pushed harder. Is this combative style what we should expect from the White House going forward?